First suspicions. He sat in the kitchen, slowly stirring his tea long after it had gone cold. The apartment was quiet, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside the window. In that silence, he caught himself sensing a distance between him and his wife, a distance that hadn't been there before. Just a year ago, their evenings had looked so different. She used to laugh, make little jokes, read aloud to him from books she loved. They would bicker over trivial things, what movie to watch, what to cook for dinner, but those arguments always ended with smiles. Now their evenings had dissolved into silent coexistence. Lately, he found himself watching her more closely, searching for the change he couldn't quite name. She used to leave her phone lying around anywhere, on the couch, in the bathroom, on the kitchen counter. Now it seemed to have become part of her. She carried it with her even when stepping into the bathroom for a few minutes, always placing it face down. At first he thought it was coincidence. But coincidences repeated too often stop being coincidences. Another small detail gnawed at him, her lateness. "Work," she would say simply, when she came home later than promised. But her voice lacked the weary irritation it always carried after genuine overtime. Instead, she looked alive, as though those late nights gave her energy, not exhaustion. He found himself counting the minutes. If she promised to be home by 7:15 he was already tense, as if the clock itself held the answer. His thoughts spun. Maybe the bus was late? Maybe she really does have more work? No, something's wrong. He hated admitting it, but fear had settled in his chest. They had been together for so many years that the thought of her with someone else felt almost impossible, like something out of a bad dream. And yet with each passing day, that dream was beginning to feel like reality. One evening over dinner, he remembered how she used to tell him everything about her day, even the smallest details. So he asked softly, "How was your day?" She shrugged, brushing it off. "Nothing special. Work as usual." He looked at her longer than usual. On the surface, nothing had changed, the same eyes, the same smile, the same gestures. And yet something in her gaze had grown distant, as if she were living a parallel life to which he had no key. That night, he lay awake for hours. He thought of the way they had met, of their first date and the laughter they shared, of the plans they once built together. And he asked himself, "Am I losing her? Is this really unavoidable?" His heart tore between trust and suspicion. He tried to convince himself it was all in his head, just fatigue, just the wear of routine. But the quiet voice inside kept whispering, "Pay attention. Something isn't right." The discovery. The evening had begun like any other. She mentioned she was going to take a shower before bed, while he stayed on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through the endless river of headlines. The television droned in the background, little more than static to his mind. He couldn't have said what was on. And then, a sound. A sharp little chime that cut straight through his apathy. He looked up. Her phone was on the coffee table. The screen lit for just a heartbeat, but it was enough. A name. Initials he didn't recognize. No one he knew. His heart slammed so violently against his ribs that he actually turned toward the bathroom, but the water was still running, loud and steady. She couldn't have heard. He remembered. Her phone was always with her. Boys. Except now. By accident. By chance. He sat frozen, breath shallow. Two voices battled in his skull. One hissed, "Don't touch it. That's her business. It's wrong." The other shouted, "This is it. Your chance. Find out or drown forever in doubt." His hand shook as it reached across the table. The cold glass sent a shiver up his arm. Something clicked inside him. Unlocking it should have been impossible. She'd changed her code a few months ago. But he already knew what it must be. A date. The date he'd overheard weeks back, tucked away in his memory. He tried it. The phone opened. The Messenger app felt like a trapdoor into another world. A smaller, darker world that now closed in on him. "I miss you. Next time, let's make it longer, okay? You're incredible. When will your man have to stay late again?" The blood drained from his face. His grip on the phone turned iron, as though it were the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. This couldn't be her. His wife. He scrolled further. Heart emojis. Pet names. plans for secret meetings. Her laughter, but for someone else now, someone not him. That same laugh that used to belong only to him. "Oh God," he whispered, barely audible. Time stopped. His heartbeat roared in his ears. She might hear it even over the water. He replaced the phone exactly where it had been, every movement deliberate, guilty. His hands shook, his thoughts spun. It's true. It's over. She betrayed me. The water shut off. Panic seized him. He leaned back, grabbed his own phone, faked casual scrolling. By the time she walked out with a towel around her shoulders and offered him her familiar smile, he felt his insides tearing apart. That smile, it was a mask now, a lie. "What's with you? You look a million miles away," she asked, tossing her phone down again. "Nothing. Just the news," he lied, forcing his voice flat. She didn't notice. She moved on, humming, drying her hair. And he sat there, numb, knowing that his life had just been cleaved clean in two, before and after. The realization. The night stretched on endlessly. He lay in bed beside her, listening to her steady breathing, unable to close his eyes. She slept so peacefully, as if her life held no secrets, as if her phone didn't contain the words of another man, words drenched in passion. He turned from side to side, the blanket heavy, the air stifling. The messages replayed in his head, each one like a blow. "I miss you. You're incredible. When will your man stay late again? Your man." Those two words cut deeper than any blade. In her eyes he was no longer her husband, no longer her beloved, just her man. A stranger to be avoided, deceived, hidden away. He stared at the ceiling, asking himself, when did this start? How did I not see it? He combed through the past months in his mind, her laughter, suddenly different, her work, that always lasted longer, the new dresses she bought without explanation. The truth had been there, and he had looked away, too afraid to face it. Memories rose unbidden. Their first meeting, a random evening in a cafe, a conversation that lasted for hours. The first time he held her hand, and she hadn't let go. The dreams they built together. Back then, he believed nothing could destroy the world they had made. And now that world lay in ruins. He turned his head toward her. She slept on her side, nestled into the pillow, her face untroubled, innocent, just as he remembered her from years ago. That innocence tore him apart. How could this tender, familiar woman betray me? Tears burned behind his eyes, but he clenched his jaw, refusing to let them fall. He felt humiliated, deceived, reduced to a fool. Rage surged inside him, but alongside it, despair coiled tight. He imagined her laughter with another man. Her fingers entwined with his. The same words, once whispered to him, now spoken to someone else. It was unbearable. Well, now, what do I do? The question circled endlessly, but no answer came. Part of him wanted to shake her awake, throw the proof in her face, demand the truth. Another part recoiled, terrified, because once spoken aloud, there would be no return. The hours dragged. Each tick of the clock struck like a hammer against his nerves. By 2 a.m., he rose and slipped quietly into the kitchen. He sat at the table under the harsh light, staring into an empty cup he hadn't even filled with tea. Maybe it's just messages. Maybe it hasn't gone further. The thought was a lifeline, but it snapped quickly. His imagination filled in the blanks with scenes more painful than any words on a screen. He remembered her just days ago, coming home radiant, glowing as if from a celebration. He had even joked, "You're awfully happy for someone who just spent 10 hours at the office." She had waved him off. "Oh, just a good meeting." Everything got solved quickly. Now he knew her happiness had come from somewhere else. When the clock read 4 a.m., he finally returned to the bedroom. He lay down beside her, careful not to touch. Her body was warm, close, familiar, and at the same time distant, unreachable, foreign. A chasm yawned between them, impossible to bridge. Just before sleep finally claimed him for a few shallow hours, one thought carved itself into his mind. I will never be able to look at her the same way again. The inner struggle. The next few days became a strange kind of reality for him. One where he played the role of an ordinary husband while inside his soul was falling apart. He woke up, had breakfast with her, talked about trivial things, even smiled at her stories. But every time her phone chimed, his heart stopped. He watched her with a new kind of sharpness. Every movement seemed suspicious, every word a clue. When she replied to someone in her messenger and quickly tilted the screen away, a wave of anger rose in him. But he restrained himself. He didn't want to stage a scene without evidence, though the evidence was already in his hands. A war raged inside him. One part of him begged, "Stay quiet. Pretend nothing happened. Maybe it will fade. Maybe she'll stop and everything will go back to the way it was." The other part shouted, "You already know the truth. Every moment of silence is a betrayal of yourself. How can you sit beside her and pretend?" He caught himself analyzing the smallest details. Why did she put on makeup just to go to the store? Why wear a new dress to work? Why is her phone always on silent now? The thoughts made him feel like a spy in his own home. He hated himself for it, but he hated even more that he no longer trusted her. One evening, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her feed, he studied her face. She laughed at a video, showing him snippets, everything looking so ordinary, so normal. If he hadn't seen those messages, he would still believe she was his most faithful, most honest companion. Maybe I'm exaggerating? The thought flickered. Maybe it's just flirting. Maybe nothing serious. But then the words came back. When will your man stay late again? They left no room for illusions. This wasn't just flirting. It was more. He began to avoid conversations with her. Answered briefly, avoided her gaze. She noticed the change and asked more than once, "You've been acting strange lately. Is everything okay?" He smiled, nodded. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just tired." He lied. He couldn't confess. The lie gnawed at him. He knew the truth yet said nothing, lived as though betrayal hadn't already poisoned their home. At night he often slipped out to the balcony. He sat in the dark with a cup of tea, staring at the city lights. His thoughts circled endlessly. Tell her? Don't tell her? Forgive? What if I'm wrong? It felt like he had lost control of his own life. He was a hostage to the situation. And shame gnawed at him too. Shame that he hadn't noticed sooner. Shame that maybe, somehow, he had given her reasons to seek warmth elsewhere. He remembered the times he had been cold, distant, buried in work, refusing conversation. Was this my fault? Did I push her away? But then anger returned, burning. I was tired too, but I didn't go looking for someone else. This was her choice. Her betrayal. The inner battle drained him more than any job ever could. He felt he was nearing his breaking point. One evening, when she said she would be late, he counted the minutes. She was supposed to be home by 9. At 9:15, his heart pounded faster. By 9:30, he couldn't sit still. At 10, he sat in the dark, convinced she was betraying him at that very moment. When she finally walked through the door, smiling, slightly disheveled, he almost exploded. But he held back. He knew one more step, one more slip, and he wouldn't be able to stay silent any longer. The moment of decision. He sat in the darkened living room, the only light slipping in through the curtains, casting shadows on the wall. The room was silent except for the relentless ticking of the clock. He was waiting for her. The phone read 9:47 p.m. She was already half an hour late. He tried to breathe evenly, but every minute dragged like an eternity. His thoughts circled. Where is she now? With whom? Why late again? Finally, the key turned in the lock. He didn't move, only stiffened. The door opened, and she stepped inside, tired, yet smiling. Her face glowed with an inner warmth, and that smile struck him like proof of everything he feared. "Hey," she said casually, kicking off her shoes. "Sorry, I'm late again. Just swamped at work." He wanted to shout, "Don't lie." But he stayed silent, staring at her, at the easy grace of her movements, at the lightness in her voice. And inside, everything clenched tight. She walked into the living room and flicked on the light. "Why are you sitting in the dark? You scared me." His eyes lifted to hers. "I was waiting," he said quietly. She tossed her bag onto a chair and disappeared into the kitchen, the clatter of dishes following. "Want some tea?" she asked, as if nothing at all had changed. He sat frozen, her voice mixing with the echo of those words on a stranger's screen. "When will your man stay late again?" In that moment he knew silence was no longer possible. It was devouring him from the inside, tearing him apart. If he lived one more day in this lie, he would lose himself completely. He rose from the couch and followed her into the kitchen. She was setting the kettle on. Hearing his footsteps, she turned and smiled. "You look so serious," she said lightly, almost teasing. He didn't answer. His heart pounded so hard he felt it in his temples. Words formed slowly, painfully. At last he spoke. "Tell me the truth. Are you cheating on me?" She froze. The cup in her hand trembled slightly. Her eyes widened for an instant, then quickly narrowed as she turned away, fumbling with the cupboard. "What nonsense," she snapped. "Why would you even ask that?" He stepped closer. His voice shook, but it was firm. "I saw your messages." The words hung in the air like a verdict. She stopped, her back still to him. A silence followed, long, unbearable. Then she turned slowly. Her eyes shimmered, with anger or fear, he couldn't tell. "You went through my phone?" she asked, indignation in her voice. "Yes," he answered. "And now I want the truth." Her lips pressed tight. She stood there, mute, before lowering her gaze. It doesn't mean anything," she whispered. "I just got lost." He looked at her, searching for even a shred of honesty in those words. Inside, a storm broke loose, pain, anger, disappointment. And yet, tangled in all of it, he felt something else, a strange release. At last, the silence was broken. At last, the words existed. That evening he understood. The moment of decision had come. To keep living inside the lie, pretending nothing had happened, or to put an end to it. He didn't yet know what choice he would make. But one thing was certain, there was no going back to the sweetness of ignorance. Confrontation. The evening in the apartment was thick with tension. He stood in the kitchen doorway while she sat in a chair, clutching a pillow to her chest. Her gaze dropped and lifted again, resting on him as though trying to read what he felt. "Please, sit down," she said softly, but his heart was pounding so hard it nearly drowned out her voice. He sat across from her, every muscle tight, the air itself pressing in. "I saw your messages," he began, locking his eyes on hers. "And I need the truth." Her lips pressed together. A silence heavier than any word stretched between them. At last she exhaled. "All right. I cheated. But it's not what you think." "How is it not what I think?" he shot back, his voice sharp but restrained. "Who was it? And for how long?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Who?" she echoed as if stalling for words. "An old classmate. We saw each other for a few months. I know it's terrible, I had no right." He swallowed hard, fighting the storm inside him. The betrayal struck so deep he wanted to scream, to pound the walls, to run, but instead he sat still, listening. "Why?" he finally asked, voice trembling. "Why did you do it?" Her head bowed. "I felt unseen," she whispered. "Lonely. And I just kept making mistake after mistake." His chest tightened. The answer explained, but it didn't heal. His mind searched for logic, his heart for forgiveness. "You could have talked to me," he said quietly. "Maybe we could have fixed something." She nodded. "I know. I regret it. And I'm ashamed. Truly ashamed." He exhaled, his fists clenching, his heartbeat hammering as though it might burst from his chest. "And now what?" he asked. "Do we just keep living like before?" She broke down, tears sliding down her cheeks. A part of his heart softened at the sight, but another part stayed cold. "I want to try," she whispered. "If you're willing." He fell silent, thoughts racing through the months of suspicion, the sleepless nights of doubt, the gnawing days of pain. The betrayal cut deep, yet he knew the choice ahead would define their future. He studied her for a long time, every muscle taut. Finally he said, "I need time. I can't decide right now." She nodded in understanding. "I'll wait," she said quietly. "I just want us to be honest with each other." It was the beginning of an unshielded conversation. The truth could no longer be hidden, but the decision remained unwritten. The evening ended in silence, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with tension, with understanding, and with the first fragile glimmer of a new chapter in their lives. The husband's emotional journey. After that evening's conversation, he was left alone in the room. The dim light only brushed the dark corners, and in the silence he could hear every breath he took. His heart pounded like a drum without pause. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over him: shock, anger, sorrow, uncertainty. He sat down on the couch and buried his face in his hands. His thoughts tangled like a web suddenly collapsing on glass. Each why echoed louder than the last. Shock and disgust. The first day after her confession passed in a haze of shock. Reality felt split in two, one half of his world unchanged, the other crumbling before his eyes. He wanted to scream, to smash his fists into the walls, but he held himself back. The restraint was painful but necessary. He knew any reckless act could destroy what little remained. "Why me?" he whispered to the empty walls. "Why our family?" His body bore the weight of the emotional trauma. His chest clenched, his heart burned, his head spun under the flood of feelings. At moments, he even felt faint, as though his mind couldn't cope with reality. Anger. By the second day, shock gave way to fury. He began noticing every small thing she did: how she walked around the apartment, how she laughed at nothing, how she handled her belongings. Each gesture lit a spark of rage. It seemed as if the entire world had betrayed him alongside her. "You can't just do this," he shouted into the empty room, trying to expel the storm inside him. "You had no right." That anger was a release for his pain, a way to feel the intensity of it and gradually let some of it go. He ran laps in the park, pummeled a punching bag, screamed into a pillow. Any physical outlet gave him a moment's relief from the crushing weight inside. Sorrow and a sense of loss. After anger came sorrow. He sat in the empty room, staring at a photo of them laughing together on vacation. His heart ached at the realization of what had been lost. He understood there could never be a return to the old life. "Maybe we're not the same people anymore," he thought. "Maybe this is the end." Sorrow was quieter than anger but cut deeper. The smallest things, the smell of coffee, the faint marks of her footsteps on the floor, her favorite cup, pierced him with pain. This sense of loss was more devastating than rage, for it meant his world had been irrevocably altered. Gradual acceptance. In time, after countless days and nights of reflection, acceptance began to surface. He realized he couldn't change the past. Every attempt to stop the pain or undo what had happened was futile. Acceptance didn't mean forgiveness, it meant acknowledging reality. "It happened," he told himself, "and I have to live with it." He started paying closer attention to his emotions, journaling his thoughts, processing each moment slowly. He knew the road to healing would be long, but the first step was honesty with himself. Acceptance also brought perspective. He began to see that his life wasn't defined solely by betrayal. He still had friends, work, hobbies, opportunities to grow. And most importantly, he still had himself, a man capable of enduring pain and emerging stronger. Making a decision and the first steps toward change. The following days were filled with silence, reflection, and an invisible pressure from the decisions that lay ahead. He felt as if he were standing at a crossroads, where every step would shape his future. Anxiety, sorrow, and residual anger occasionally stirred within him, but now they were no longer just chaotic emotions. They had become signals, urging him to act. He began writing his thoughts on paper. The journal became a sort of therapeutic space. He wrote about pain, fears, doubts, and hopes. With each word, he realized that his decision could not be impulsive. It had to be grounded in his values and in the understanding of what would truly bring healing. The first steps. The first step he identified was an honest conversation with his wife. This was a challenge, because despite the pain, he understood that if they were to work on their relationship, openness had to be the foundation. He sat beside her at the table, notebook in hand, and said, "I need to understand what we do next. I want to hear your thoughts, but I also need to express mine." She nodded, her gaze both sad and sincere. She knew that his decision would not be easy and that it would require maximum honesty from both of them. He began with his own feelings. "I can't say that I forgive yet. It hurts, and part of me fears it might never pass. But I'm willing to try to understand what happened, and whether we can move forward." She listened quietly, then slowly replied, "I'm ready to do whatever it takes to fix our relationship. I'm ready for therapy, for honest conversations, for any effort that makes you feel heard and safe." He felt a slight relief, but he knew it was only the beginning. The inner struggle. The most difficult part was his own doubts. Every time he imagined life together after betrayal, thoughts flashed through his mind. What if it happens again? Can I trust her again? He wrote these fears in his journal and tried to break them down logically. What really happened? What lessons can I learn? What am I willing to do to preserve the relationship? Gradually, the inner chaos began to transform into a clear, structured process for making decisions. The beginning of change. He decided on concrete steps. 1. Individual therapy, to work through his pain and fears. 2. Couples therapy, so they could openly express feelings and rebuild trust. 3. Honest rules of interaction, full transparency in communication, discussing any suspicions without accusations. 4. Restoring shared time, small daily rituals that remind them of care and attention. Each step required strength, and he felt exhausted. But alongside the fatigue came a sense of control. He was no longer a passive witness to events, but an active participant in his own life. The first test. The first weeks after making the decision were the most challenging. He faced waves of doubt, memories of past betrayals, and fears of losing trust again. But he learned to pause, breathe deeply, and return to rational thinking. One evening, he watched his wife prepare dinner. Previously, even this simple domestic moment would have stirred a storm of emotions, but now he felt a quiet understanding. Both of them were committed to working on themselves. "Thank you for being willing," he said softly. She smiled, and in that smile he saw the first glimmer of hope. This first step did not heal all the wounds, but it gave him a sense of moving forward. He realized that rebuilding trust is a marathon, not a sprint. Most importantly, the work on oneself and on a relationship always begins with inner honesty and the willingness to act.